So we now know how to combine like terms. Like terms have to have the same variable and the same exponent. Today we're going to look at a different way to simplify an expression, and that is by using the distributive property. So here's what I want you to look at first. I want you to simplify the problem 2 times the quantity of 3 plus 4 by following order of operations. That's your PEMDAS, parentheses, exponents, multiplication and division left to right, addition and subtraction left to right. Parentheses have to come first. Since I have a set of parentheses, you must do that first. 3 plus 4 is 7. Now I have 2 times 7, which is 14. That you are used to doing. Now I'm going to ask you to simplify it a different way. I want you to multiply first and then add. I want you to take this 2 and multiply it by 3 and multiply it by 4, because both of those numbers are inside the parentheses. They both have to be multiplied by the 2. 2 times 3 is 6. 2 times a positive 4 is a positive 8, so I write plus 8. Now I can add 6 plus 8. I get 14. Notice that you get the same answer. This method of simplifying, guys, is called the distributive property. And it only works when you have one number on the outside of your parentheses. So here's our goal for today. Let's distribute. To use the distributive property, you multiply the number in front of the parentheses by everything inside the parentheses. That is your distributive property. Multiply the number in front of your parentheses by everything inside your parentheses. We are going to practice this. Simplify each of the following polynomials. Simplify means make as small as possible. That's what we're doing. Make it as small as you can. I have a 2 on the outside of my parentheses. I need to distribute it to the 4x and distribute it to the 3. I do that by multiplying. 2 times 4x is 8x. 2 times a positive 3 is a positive 6, so you write plus 6. That's as much as you can simplify it. Take the 6, multiply it by the 8. Take the 6, multiply it by y. Now remember that invisible coefficient is a 1. 6 times a positive 1y is a positive 6y. When you multiply and get a positive, write a plus. Half times 10 is 5. Half times 12x is 6x. There's no x on that 5, I'm sorry. It's just 5 plus 6x. Half of 10 is 5, half of 12x is 6x. 12 times a 1x is 12x. 12 times 8, I don't know that one in my head. You can use a calculator if you need to. 96. Distribute. Take what's on the outside, multiply it by everything on the inside. 8 times 2 is 16. Now I have 8 times a negative 9y. Positive times a negative is a negative. 8 times 9, 72y. 7 times 1x is 7x. 7 times a negative 1.5 is a negative 10.5. Feel free to use a calculator, you're multiplying. 2 times a half is 1x. 2 times a minus 10 is a negative 20. Now you cannot write that as your final answer, guys, because that is not as simplified as you can make it. One coefficients are always invisible, so you have to write it as x minus 20. 5 times 1x is 5x. 5 times a minus 10 is a negative 50. So take a minute and look. The first 4 examples all had a plus sign in between them, and my answers had a plus sign. The next 4 examples had minus signs in between, and my answers have minus signs. But if you notice, we didn't do any negative times negatives. So that's the distributive property. Now what I want you to do is extend that distributive property when you're dealing with negative numbers. So I do want you to go back and recall your integer multiplication rules. And why is it only multiplication? Because that's how you distribute. You multiply. A positive times a positive is a positive. Positive times a negative is a negative. A negative times a positive is a negative. And a negative times a negative is a positive. You could straight up memorize them, but if you need a hint, I like using a tic-tac-toe board. So if you draw a tic-tac-toe board, the only one you memorize is the positives go diagonal. A positive times a positive is a positive. Everywhere else, you put negative signs. Now your integer rules go across. A positive times a negative is a negative. Negative times a positive is a negative answer, and a negative times a negative is a positive. Do not care straight up memorize or if you draw your tic-tac-toe board every time, but you need to know these rules because we are going to distribute again to simplify each of the following problems. Make it as small as possible. And if you notice, there's a negative on the outside every single time. It does not change how we solve the answer. It only changes what integer sign do I put with my numbers, positives or negatives. Negative 3 times a positive 2 is a negative 6. Negative 3 times a positive 5x, a negative times a positive is a negative, so I write minus. 3 times 5x is 15x. Why do I keep putting an x with that? There's no x, it's just negative 6 minus 15x. Numbers keep numbers. Negative 2 times a positive 1x is a negative 2x. Negative 2 times a negative 3 is a positive 6. So when you do the multiplication, if your answer is a positive, you write plus. If your answer is a negative, you write it as a minus. That's how it's working. Negative 4 times a positive 5 is a negative 20. Negative 4 times a negative 1 is a positive 4y. Notice when it's a positive, you write plus. When it's a negative, you write minus. Now, this is about as tricky as it's going to get. There's just a negative sign in front of your parentheses, so that means it's a negative 1. Negative 1 times a positive 9 is a negative 9. Negative 1 times a positive 4n is a negative 4n. Here's your hint. Minus signs and negative signs really are the same thing. They really are. So when I say negative 4n and I say minus 4n, it means the exact same thing. That is how you distribute. But now sometimes on a multiple choice answer, the way we write it and what's given in your multiple choices is different. So I want you to go back and look at our answer here. We've got a complete perfect answer, great. But what if the multiple choice answers was this? Could I rewrite this as a minus 4n first and then my minus 9 second? Absolutely. But what if I was to take this 4y first and put my 20 second? Is what I wrote okay? Absolutely not, because this negative, or this 20 is negative, this 20 is positive. If I wrote it like this, then it would be correct. My 4y is positive, my 20 is negative, that's acceptable. This guy I could have written 6 first minus 2x second, as long as your 2x is a negative and your 6 is a positive. You could have flipped this around and did negative 15x minus 6. 15x stayed negative, negative 6 stayed negative. So the order doesn't matter as long as the integer signs in front match. Make sure you are rewriting the problems, you are distributing and watching your negative signs. Negative times a negative is a positive. Negative times a positive is a negative. Negatives work as minuses, positives work as pluses. Good luck.